Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this here is a podcast I do monthly in two different forms. First of all, it is available in a video visual version here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. On top of that, it is also available in an audio-only form, like an actual podcast, so you can take it around and listen to it really wherever the hell you want to. Simply look up ModChat, all one word, on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it is available on most of them. Either way, this here is the podcast that I do where I talk about not necessarily this being a news show, but I do cover things that I find new, interesting, cool, sometimes doing a little bit of show and tell, giving my opinion on things in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. As I said, I also try and do this at least monthly, so sometimes there's going to be a few more episodes in a month, but usually I try and get at least one episode out there, so that's how we do it here. We also got Lily on the side, but she usually just sleeps. But either way, I am excited to get into this episode here because there's been a lot that's been going on, and some pretty awesome, pretty big, pretty revolutionary stuff across all fronts here. I'm really excited about it from that aspect there, but as opposed to just hyping it up and telling you all about it, I should probably just tell you all about it, so let's just go ahead and get into the episode.
Now, one of the first big developments that ended up coming out was for the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4, being the Lapse Kernel Exploit released, and as it states here on EULA, it is compatible up to PS4 firmware 12.02 as well as PS5 firmware at 10.01. But, well, we'll be looking into this here. They state here, quoting the article, dropping a bomb on the scene, developer ABC released the Lapse Kernel Exploit for PS4 and PS5 yesterday. The exploit is compatible up to firmwares 12.02 for the PS4 and 10.01 for the PS5, or more specifically, the developer states it was patched in 12.50 and PS5 10.20. So this is a massive release. Now, looking into this here for the exploit details, they do state that this relies on a double-free vulnerability in AIO multi-delete as described here, which there is a link to this just describing it. However, they do state the currently released implementation is specifically for PS4 firmwares 8.0x only at the moment. The exploit will need to be ported to other firmwares, something that is generally considered more difficult on the PS5. And notably, for recent firmwares and in particular on the PS5, we will need user mode entry points, so WebKit exploits, etc. In other words, implementing a fully working jailbreak on higher firmwares, PS4 and PS5 could take some time. To my knowledge, there isn't currently a public user mode exploit on those higher firmwares to act as an entry point. At this point, I'm discounting the Lua exploits. You either got the games in time or you didn't, and I don't consider it practical. This is just my opinion, of course. And something a little bit interesting here, they do state in parallel and equally as interesting, ZekoShao has hinted that we might be getting a hypervisor exploit for PS5 firmwares 3.x and 4.x. This would be a massive breakthrough, considering the PS5 hypervisor moved outside of the kernel for increased security with firmwares 3.x. A hypervisor exploit allows for basically full control of the system. It is considered better than real-time debugging hack case stuff from a performance and feature perspective. Now, if you want to download this here, there is a link available, but they do state that to keep in mind, this is currently only for PS4 8.0x, and that for the PS5 as well as higher PS4 firmwares, the scene is technically waiting on new user mode entry points. So do keep that in mind. This is something to kind of keep the pulse on here, and this is absolutely exciting, but we'll see what comes of this here. It will just take some time, as we've seen from other jailbreaks, exploits, releases, things like that, but still certainly something that just came out of the blue here, at least from my perspective, and something definitely awesome to see. Now we're over on the front page for PSX Place, because you all might remember from last episode here, I ended up covering this here, which was BadHTAB, which is, as it states, a hardware-software based hypervisor exploit for the PlayStation 3. And there's been a few updates on here where I guess I'll read this in opposite order, but update 2 and 3. So now not only Linux but also overclocking on PS3 is now possible with BadHTAB exploit and PS3 Hin beta build that are currently supporting the exploit. This is still considered an experimental exploit and features, so use at your risk. And it's saying that we can look at some of the updates here. So for example, we do have Petite Boot there, and then for this we have PS3 Hin, but now we have have the underclocking and overclocking functionality within PS3 HIN, this beta build right here, if you are using, of course, if you're going to be using BadHTAB. But on top of that, there's also a fourth update stating that EscortDo has created a fork of the BadHTAB exploit with some changes such as an automatic reboot if glitch crashes PS3 feature, among other changes to make it easier for testing the new exploit. Because you have to remember, one thing I was saying here with BadHTAB is that even if you do a super clean install, there's a chance it might not work. But if you do kind of a odd install or might not do the best one, like a physical install here, it could work better because the exploit itself is just not stable. Well, respectfully, and I do mean this respectfully, it looks like we can kind of throw BadHTAB out of the window, because if we come back to the front page here, we can see that there's something else called BadWDSD, which is actually, well, a different exploit, but an evolution of what we were seeing there, so to speak. And they're stating this has not come out yet, right? BadHTAB is released. It's out in the wild. You can try it. At the time I'm recording this, it has not been released, but BadWDSD, they're stating here over on PSX Place from STL Cards WS, this is pondering if a Q custom firmware for Super Slim NOR models is on the horizon with the latest software and hardware exploit. Now, getting into this here, they state, since the disclosure and release of the BadHTAB hardware software exploit, we have seen in recent weeks with PS3 HIN with BadHTAB now having the ability to run PS3 Linux and overclocking on non-custom firmware models, thanks to the efforts led by Omsen 2526, otherwise known as qFU, and the BadHTAB release. By the way, when I'm referring to them here, I'm going to say qFU, as that seems to be their other username or name they go by on here. However, it's stated that since then, we have seen continued progression from qFU, and other developers like PS3 HIN developer EscortDo, among others, have now confirmed even the ability to downgrade a Super Slim NOR models through this new exploit that has been superseded by BadWDSD, replacing BadHTAB, as it also looks like this exploit can replicate a custom firmware experience with a new qCFW that is being worked on. It does not seem likely we will be able to downgrade to 3.55 and install a custom firmware PUP for Super Slim models, though this theory needs to be tested to be completely ruled out, but rather inject the features like PS3 HIN on boot, but a lot more powerful than PS3 HIN without the mod chip. The details are still emerging and development continues. We hope to get more details on qCFW as this project advances in both hardware and software tweaks, but it looks like something great is coming to the PS3. qFU has set up a GitHub with the new BadWDSD exploit, also issuing a warning of "do not use yet." Stay tuned in the coming days, weeks as this project matures. Below you can find some of the answers to questions asked and information that EscortDo has provided the forum. Also, EscortDo provided us with some preview videos of the exploit general use and also a downgrade of 4.82 to 4.40. So I'm going to take a look at some of this here, and I'm going to be going out of order, and first I'm going to go through these questions and answers here. So one of the questions asked is any way we can decrypt MET LDR2 with this, so MET loader 2. And they state from EscortDo, this has now been superseded by BadWDSD for NOR. Even with BadWDSD having level 0 privileges on boot, it is not as easy as that, from what I understand from much smarter people than me in the chat. I think moving forward, there is now a path to actually accomplishing that now though, thanks to qFU. Next up, I was really hoping that with such early peek poke access, we could maybe just knock out the firmware signature check allowing full custom firmware. That would be nice. EscortDo does say, kind of. Can't install by PUP though. qFU can explain better what he calls qCFW. In regard to downgrading a Super Slim, and this is a NOR revision, keep that in mind, he states, downgrading works with BadWDSD and is easier than normal once Pico mod chip is installed anyways. I successfully downgraded my NOR Super Slim last night from 4.91 to 4.40, and I think qFU downgraded his from 4.92 to 4.82. Currently, from my understanding, is this will only work with NOR and not eMMC though, so do keep this in mind. This is me interjecting here. For example, I do have one Super Slim unit, but it's one of those that has, I think it's the 12 gigabyte onboard module, I want to say. It has storage built into it, but it is a eMMC system, so even though I do have a Super Slim, unfortunately, my Super Slim is not going to be compatible with this, and this is keeping it in mind for you all as well too. So if you have a Super Slim and you're getting excited for this, one, there is going to be soldering required, and two, it's not going to be working on every Super Slim, so keep that in mind. Another question, I think that Super Slims cannot go below min ver check value, as this has always been the case, right? And EscortDo answers, I think we can with Exploit, as qfu set version to 4.00 in recovery with patches. We talked about it a bit, but have not yet confirmed, but most likely will result in a brick if lower pup installed. But it could also not install it. If it did install and it was bricked, I don't know if Exploit would be able to recover it or not. Might need hardware flasher. I think we would have to try it out to confirm. A good question coming up here, just to know, why downgrade the Super Slim? And Aldo's Tools actually chimes in and says, downgrade is not a commonly used feature. However, there are situations where a new firmware release make the payloads unstable due to a feature removal or unexpected changes in system files, like what happened in 4.89. Until the issues are fixed by the devs, some custom firmware users prefer to go back to a previous stable version, for example, Rebug. Downgrade is also helpful for developers that want to test their software in various firmware versions. And finally here, for anybody who's excited about CFW or qCFW, we have an explanation of this from qfu. Now, it's asked here, I'm guessing that qCFW stands for quasi-CFW, since quasi means resembling, having some but not all the features of. And qfu ends up responding here stating, correct, my end goal of qCFW would be load Cobra from cold boot. Unfortunately, AppLoader must be patched to run a custom level 2. Just found that out. This means this feature will never work on BadHTAB, because if you can change level 2 code even just 1 byte, it won't boot, so expect long time for it. If it all goes well, I plan to base it from EvoNat, level 2 VSH part. At its peak, it should be able to do all of custom firmware features except one thing, dumping EID root key. Just different installation method. You can't install custom pup normal way, and it's a good thing because if you install existing custom firmware, you will brick. Also, this is a hardware mod only. You must run software installer one time, and maybe even when installing or upgrading qCFW. Then it is permanent. If you don't mess with the firmware anymore, it will just stay with you forever. The loader is still secure, so on CoreOS, level 0 for bootloader and level 1.self for level 1 loader and to initiate ATA must be untouched. But then we just add the .diff files to it to apply patches on memory after loaded at boot. Also can whole file not diff, but it's too big. So there is no different from custom firmware and end result. ModChip also supports official firmware. In this case, you will only get downgrading plus a level 1 peak poke through hypervisor call 114, and also slower boot, about 30 seconds. But it is more safe because you don't touch CoreOS, so you can always recover. Now, I do want to single this out because essentially, before anyone gets excited, and this is exciting here, we do need to keep in mind 3 things essentially. 1, this is going to require soldering. 2, this is not going to be compatible with every single PS3 out there. Again, I mentioned this is going to be for NOR Super Slims, you'll be able to do this, but eMMC Super Slims, it doesn't seem like you'll be able to do this. And 3, for some people who are expecting some operations which require you to dump the EID root key or the ERK, you still won't be able to do those, unfortunately. One of the things I'm thinking of is actually converting a system from CEX or retail mode to a DEX, which would be a debug or development mode. If you've used custom firmware on PS3 before, there are ways of doing this where you can essentially convert your retail system to a dev system and you can even convert it back. However, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it looks like this wouldn't be possible on here because part of that does require dumping the EID root key when you go through that conversion process. So if you're not able to dump the EID root key at all, then you're probably still going to have to stay on a modified retail system, which, keep in mind, for most people is going to be fine. However, one thing we can take a look at is the GitHub here. Now, do keep in mind it says do not use yet, so I'm not sure if there's going to be too much on here. And indeed, right here, there's not going to be any releases, there's no photos or anything. I mean, they do have the code and the source and such on here, so if you want to work around with it, compile it, use it yourself, you're able to. But from what I understand as well too, even at this point here, the physical installation is going to be different than BadHTAB. So BadHTAB is out there, it's working, you can do it all, but BadWDSD, the install process has not been made public yet. Now for our last update here, I'm going to show you you a couple videos from Jason, or Escort do. So it states here, this first one is BadWDSD Exploit PS3 NOR Super Slim Test. So you can see he has his PS3 mostly taken apart and then kind of put back together. I do know that he has the mod chip, which is RP2040 based. It's a Raspberry Pi Pico, I believe, soldered to the back of it. He ended up turning it on. It was beeping quite a bit here. And you could at least see the reason why he's showing this. You're not going to see too much of a major difference on here. However, the reason why this is important and the reason why it is nice he's showing this is that you're at least able to see the reliability of it here. Where he had it installed, you saw, I mean, it took a decent amount of time, so it took longer to, run the exploit and such on here. But the nice thing is, once it was all installed, he was just able to press the button, turn it on, and it was working. For some people who say that's not really that big of a deal because, hey, I mean, PS3 HIN is on here. I could already do that with custom firmware or PS3 HIN. This is an entirely different exploit. It's an entirely different entry point on here. But on top of that, compared to BadHTAB, where you had maybe a 10% success rate on here, the success rate on this one is much, much higher. And you could actually see here through his settings, you saw here, BadHTAB, BadWDSD exploit testing. So he's able to go here and he's able to run several of these options on here. So you have like the level 1 patches, he's going through some of the level 2 options as well too, or I guess the settings on there. A lot of this is going to be really like homebrew modding and developer specific. So if you're watching this and you might be thinking, and I mean no disrespect by this, but if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, this isn't really anything that I would get much use out of. This isn't going to be for everyone, but at a technical and foundational and exploit level, this is really impressive to see, especially since we just went from BadHTAB to now this. Now this one here, since it's a longer video at about 12 minutes almost, I am going to skip around a bit on this here, but you can see that this is the same system he's working on. He's going to go down to the system information here, and you can see that this is running firmware 4.82. Now this whole process is going to be a downgrade, so what he's doing here is he is completely unplugging the system, and you're actually going to get a little bit of a look at the work behind it here. So we can't see the actual install itself on here, and I'm sure that was obscured a little bit on purpose, but you could see here at least there is a Raspberry Pi Pico W. It is soldered in, and there are some dip switches right here. So this here too, I've talked a bit with Escort Do about it, and you could see in order to do this, he ended up flipping one of these dip switches. So for doing this actual install, it is going to have to be refined a little bit with having this accessible outside of the case and not necessarily the chip itself, because you do want to keep the wire short with most installs, but at least having access to like the dip switches or just switches in general outside the case. So this documentation hasn't been released yet, so I'm not quite sure what all those dip switches individually are going to do, but it looks like he ended up flipping that. Then he does have to plug the system back in, and then he's going to be turning it on. So there we go, we have it plugged in. Then he should be able to turn the system on, and you all might notice right here, I'm actually not going to cut this, but when he ends up turning the system on, when you turn it on with the controller, he's not physically holding down or pushing any of the buttons, and I'm making note of that, because you're going to see it's not going to boot up normally. It's not going to boot up into the Game OS or the XMB. Let's just see what it does here. All right, that fan is spinning. It's going. Still no cuts or anything. And the longer boot up time, this is kind of just expected with this as well too. Looks like we might see something on screen. Maybe. I have seen this before, I just don't know when exactly the timing is, but there we go. You could see here that it ended up connecting, well not connecting, but it ended up booting up into safe mode. So again, just flipping that dip switch ends up making the system do that. But also right here, you could see connect storage media that contains update version of 4.00 or later, which harkens back to what was mentioned previously, where in the patches it was set to 4.00. Now, if you've gone through this install process here, he does have a USB drive hooked up, and he's going to go through the process of, well, there we go, the controller is connected, and then it's going to go through the standard installation process. I'll skip ahead here a little bit. So it's checking the firmware, it's doing a installation of the firmware itself where it has to prepare it, then I believe it's going to do a reboot, then it does the install process. This one I feel comfortable skipping ahead because there's nothing particularly entertaining on this, and I mean that respectfully here. If you've done an install like this before, you know what it looks like, so there's nothing that's going to be really specific here. However, if we skip to the end, it's going to get to 100%, the system is turning off. And then we're going to see something a little different here. Well, at least it's going to be from Escort Dude's own doing. Really what we're waiting on is him to move, which again, he's going to unplug the system. And I did talk to him a little bit about this. He did say in order to change these, you have to completely pull power from the system, which is why he's turning it off at the power strip itself or the power supply. But you could see he flips that dip back. He's now going to put the console back down. Then he's going to plug it back into power and turn it on. So we'll see that here momentarily. Yep, alright, so that's plugging in. Now he turns on the system, and again, I'm not going to cut this part, but we're just going to wait and see. So it is turning on. Do keep in mind, again, like I've said, it is going to take longer to boot up during this process here. And there we go, we got the PS3 boot logo there. Just the standard one, because, yeah, actually, this was just official firmware that it was downgraded to. But we should be able to see that now. All right, that's loaded up. He's going to go over to these settings, go to system settings. We got some thank yous here. And system information, there we go, it is 4.40. So he was able to successfully downgrade his system this way. So overall, if anybody might be confused and they're wondering, okay, what should I use? What should I do on this here? I will say this, if you're looking for, I guess, some more power, some leverage over your system and some better control, or even if you see something here that you do have a need for, you'd want to probably wait for BadWDSD as opposed to using BadHTAB. If you're one of those people, you're seeing this and you're not seeing anything that's really like exciting you or really for your own purpose, PS3 HIN is going to work just fine. And if both of those are upsetting you, just get a older compatible system, jailbreak it, install custom firmware on there, and you'll have a pretty solid experience. Now this here is exciting because we're going to be going back in time a little bit to the original Xbox for a new release that came out here, being CycloMod, which allows you to flash the onboard BIOS on a version 1.6 motherboard. Now this is pretty big here because for anybody who does not know, I'm just going to explain some of the context here. The original Xbox has been hacked up wide open for so many years now at this point. You do have soft mods and you have hard mods, and with hard mods, the point of a hard mod is getting the system to load up a custom BIOS. Now there's two ways of doing it. One of them is that you could install a mod chip which has a custom BIOS, so when you turn on the system, it boots up from that mod chip as opposed to the onboard BIOS, and there you go, you have your mod. The second thing is going to be doing a TSOP flash, where you can quite literally flash the onboard TSOP chip on the system itself, replacing the retail BIOS with a custom BIOS. So that's actually a pretty cool and even affordable method, because while as it does require opening up the system, you do have to do a tiny bit of soldering, but even that soldering at this point is optional because there's actually ways around that where you can bridge a few points without having to solder. But once you install that custom BIOS on there, you essentially have the functionality of a single BIOS mod chip without having to purchase or install an actual mod chip. So it's nice having that middle ground between a soft mod and a full mod chip installation. The big difference though is that 1.6 motherboards were not compatible with this. You could not flash the TSOP on there because, well, there was no TSOP on that system. The actual BIOS itself was combined and popped into the Cyclops chip itself. So for a 1.6 system, you could either soft mod it or you could install a mod chip. There was no middle ground. Until now, like so many years later. So getting into this here, they state, in a groundbreaking development for original Xbox enthusiasts, a user known as Prehistoric Man has unveiled a method to flash the onboard BIOS of a version 1.6 Xbox console, a feat previously deemed impossible due to the non-flashable nature of the Cyclops chip. Traditionally, 1.6 Xbox models required hardware mod chips for BIOS modifications, as they lacked the TSOP flash chips present in earlier versions. However, Prehistoric Man's discovery reveals that the Cyclops chip possesses a hidden serial interface, and there was some theory that you could do this without opening up the system, but there is a correction here stating you cannot do this without opening up the Xbox. The motherboard has a 0 ohm resistor tying those AV pins to ground. Now they state here that the process involves connecting a 3.3 volt USB to UART adapter to specific pins on the 1.6's motherboards, utilizing a Python script script named Cyclops Flasher to interact with the chip. Now, it's also notable that this method offers a safer alternative to TSOT flashing because it allows for recovery in case something happens. Now, this advancement not only simplifies the modifying process for 1.6 Xbox consoles, but it also opens the door to further exploration of the Cyclops chip's capabilities, including potential modifications to the System Management Controller SMC for enhanced functionality. Now, for details, instructions, and necessary tools, there is a guide right here, which let's go ahead, click that, and see what's going on. Now, Prehistoric Man ended up creating a full thread about this, which is the tutorial itself, and covering this here just from a high level, it looks like you will need that 3.3 volt USB to UART adapter, as they state here, but they also mentioned see if you can get one that has a TX resistor value lower than 1000, because the Xbox's RX has a 1000 pull down. You need a 1.6 Xbox, of course, a soldering iron, Python installed on the PC, the flashing script, and a custom BIOS file at 256 kilobytes. Now, it looks like here for these steps, you'll need to connect the UART adapter to the Xbox. This can be done either by connecting it to the AV port or by opening the Xbox and using the internal connections. So it looks like here there's going to be 3 connections that are needed. So number 1, the Cyclops pin 29 is debug, so you can wire it to the 3.3 volt standby. So this one, keep in mind, these are really good images here and they're nice and zoomed in and such, but this here is going to be, okay, yeah, that makes sense. If you've done mods like this isn't all too difficult by any means, but looks like there's a pad here and then there's this little pad here. So as opposed to wiring to this actual like harder to get point here, you do have 2 pins you can just bridge with a piece of wire. The next one, it looks like, is the Cyclops pin 64, that is TXD. So you'll need to wire it to the adapter's RX pin. So you could either do it near Cyclops or you could do it underneath the AV port. So let's see here. This one looks like it's going to be, oh, okay, so you'd end up taking this point here, which it looks like you could probably just scrape one of these vias. For example, you could either solder it directly here, or you could scrape this via and tack your wire to it, or you could do it underneath the AV port, which it looks like this here, yeah, you also have that ability. So you can either wire it up right there, or you can wire it up to this pad or this pad. So probably I would say underneath the motherboard is going to be the easier option. Finally, Cyclops pin 63 is RXD, and you can wire it to the adapter's TX pin. So top side near the AV port. Oh, yeah, that should be pretty simple. So looks like you can just hit that pad right there, or on the bottom side underneath the AV port. Yeah, that one right there as well too. So the soldering on this, especially if you've done Xbox mods, does, in my opinion, does not look difficult. But that's if you have, keep in mind, that's if you have the experience there. If you've never done this before, this is probably going to be pretty difficult for you. And the fourth one, it says connect ground to the adapter's ground pin, and you can use the Xbox metal case or any screw holding down the motherboard. There's a few options on that. There's also the AV cable method, but honestly, it says it's not advisable, and I'm actually going to listen to Prehistoric Man. Yeah, I'd rather do this one here, the top ones here. But if you cut your L frame before doing a mod chip install, you're going to have to repair that trace. So it states you'll have to plug in the USB before powering on the Xbox, then plug in the Xbox, leave it on standby power, identify what serial port your adapter has, install Python 3, then you can open up something to run Python itself, and you can execute that script right there, which you're going to hit Python, you're going to load up the script, you're going to load up your BIOS, and you're going to send it over the COM port. From there, it looks like you'll need to erase the flash. It might get frozen sometimes, but otherwise they state that while the Cyclops can get upset and stop responding sometimes, if you can't get communication, try unplugging the Xbox for 10 seconds. If you get an erase timeout, make sure you have a ground connection, and if you can't get a connection, your serial adapter might have too much internal resistance. They state that the flashing process takes about 2 minutes, and then the verification takes another 2 minutes, which I would definitely recommend doing that. And then after that, once it's flashed, your Xbox power button should work again, so you can turn it on. And if you get video issues and you removed the 2 resistors in step 1.2.5, you'll need to place the resistors back. And that was what, 1.2.5. Okay. Oh, and this would be if you're using the AV cable itself. Okay. Okay, got it. But it looks like once we have all of that, since we're not going to need that UART cable, you can then just disconnect the UART adapter and undo your soldering for ground, RX, TX, and the debug wire, probably best to just remove that. So yeah, that as well too. However, that really seems to be it. So if you're looking to run a custom BIOS on your 1.6 Xbox and you don't want to do a ModChip install, honestly, this is really awesome. This is awesome. I can't believe this. This is great. I don't have enough good things to say about this. Now, I haven't talked too much about the Switch in a while, but there's been a new major update for the Switch's firmware itself, being the 20.0.0 update, which the current one now is 20.0.1, and with that comes a new mainline update in Atmosphere. And I actually did want to highlight this here because there are a few notable changes that some people who have modded Switches running custom firmware might need to look out for. Currently, this is Atmosphere 1.9.0, which is in pre-release here, and some of the changes here you could see are that basic support was added for 20.0.0. Of course, this also still works on 20.0.1, so that should still be fine. However, one of the mentions here, it states here that please note, as a result of changes made to Nintendo's software in 20.0.0, there's roughly 10 megabytes less memory available for custom system modules. We can only steal a maximum of 14 megabytes from the applet pool, down from 40 megabytes. To compensate for this, AMS MITM's heap usage has been reduced by 20 megabytes. And to facilitate this, a new helper module called Memlet was added, so that memory may be temporarily stolen during the ROMFS building process. Now, even if this doesn't mean too much for you, this is the second reason why I wanted to highlight this here. It states that hopefully this results in relatively little breakage. However, it is possible that user mods which replace extremely large numbers of files in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom may no longer function. And if you're affected by this, you'll see a data apport 0x101 error when trying to launch the game with mods. And he does say to please reach out to himself, Cyrus M, on Discord if this occurs, to share your error report binary. However, some issues may be impossible to fix. So just keeping that in mind here, not only, again, there is going to be less memory allocated to system modules, and hopefully that doesn't break all too much there, but if you're going to be modding some games pretty heavily, such as Tears of the Kingdom, it actually might not be in your best interest to be on the latest and greatest firmware. So this might be one of those times where you might benefit from just being on the final version of the 19 firmware as opposed to the 20 firmware. That's again why I want to share this, because when I was going in and updating my Switch, when I end up reading these, I was like, oh, that's those are a bit substantial changes here. But again, it's not a fault of Atmosphere. It is due to how the actual base firmware 20.0.0 from Nintendo has changed. Still worth noting on here. Now here's some modding related news that was really sweeping a whole lot of sites here in regard to the Nintendo EULA. Now they state here, this is from GBA Temp from Shadow One posting this, that Nintendo updates their end user license agreement, preventing users from suing them and allows them to brick the console if used illegally. Now, since we're about a month away from the Switch 2, actually less than that, it's no surprise that Nintendo is really trying to kind of gear up on all fronts here, and one of the things is they are really trying to, I know, completely prevent any form of modding on their new system, and they want to just at least prolong it as long as possible. So on here, they've made a few changes, and if you update to 20.0.0 or 20.01, whichever one, if you update to the at least 20 firmware, you do have to accept a new terms of service in order to continue playing online if you have an account on there that you do care about. And that is bringing this up here where essentially there is a class action waiver, so you're not going to be able to sue with that. And it even states they are giving up their right to be able to sue Nintendo through a class action lawsuit. However, that's not really the one that I was wanting to focus on here. It's this here where they state the second change of interest, which is that of Section 2, talks about the license that goes into effect when making and using a Nintendo account service. Within this section, and to summarize it, it basically tells the users that they cannot modify in any way, shape, or form, decrypt, reverse engineer, or copy, etc., any portion of the Nintendo account services. Now, what could happen if one does modify the account service? Well, they state here, I'm just going to read this directly, without limitation, you agree that you may not A. Publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services. B. Bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the Nintendo account services, including through use of any hardware or software that would cause the Nintendo account services to operate other than in accordance with its documentation and intended use. C. Obtain, install, or use any unauthorized copies of Nintendo account services. Or D. Exploit the Nintendo account services in any manner other than to use them in accordance with the applicable documentation and intended use, in each case without Nintendo's written consent or express authorization, or unless otherwise expressly permitted by law. You acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. So this has definitely come under fire quite a bit, and it's even brought up some things in regard to different territories as well too, where essentially from what I understand here, this seems to be something that can be allowed in the United States, for example, but over in the EU, the European Union, so anyone across the pond, this is not going to fly, but they're also going to have a separate EULA over there, so that also does make sense. Now, my opinion on this here, what I think might be going on, what I think, the results might be, or why this is here, whatever it might be. In short, and again, this is my opinion, I believe, again, Nintendo is doing everything they can to completely just squash out, thwart, just disable modding, especially for the Switch 2. For the original Switch, every single system is moddable. Every single system can run unsigned code in some way, whether you're going to do the RCM method, whether you have one of those rare 4.1.0 systems with warm boot hacks, or of course, if you install a chip in there. And of course, it's been known that anytime you modify a system, if it's going to be touching the Nintendo network, you do run a risk of getting a ban. Now, from what I've seen for the last several years as this has been documented, and I've covered this in ModChat as well too, in short, Nintendo can see if you're running custom firmware, but for the most part, they really don't care, and by that I mean they don't ban your account, and this is not me saying, hey, this is good, this is bad, whatever it is, it's more just citing an observation here. Essentially, they don't care until you are impacting the online experience negatively. And that's, for example, if you are doing mods and cheats in online games, if you're modifying leaderboards, if you even change your game icon, like your user icon, to something that is not sanctioned by Nintendo, anything that is going to affect the online experience for others in any sort of way, plus any kind of piracy, even if you have your own cartridge and you install it to the system, any sort of piracy that Nintendo counts as piracy, those can be flags for a ban. That's been known for several years. However, if you're just running a custom firmware to do things such as, I don't know, play music in the background, run a custom theme, even doing save modding on your own single-player games, those have not resulted in bans. So that's kind of how it's run there, at least off of the EULA. But no, here they're just saying if you're modding anything on the online services, or if this is touching online in any sort of way, whether it's disruptive or not, we can ban your account, which I've always said, you run at risk of banning your account, or they can just straight up brick the system itself. Now, again, this is not my interpretation, but my opinion on what might happen here. Will this affect any original Switches? If you have a modified original Switch, if you're taking it online, if you're not being disruptive, I would be surprised if they do take an action such as banning your system in that regard. If you're being disruptive with your system, just like what I talked about a minute or two ago, I could understand why they would do a ban on the system. But when it comes to this for the Switch 2, I feel like that's probably where we would see it more. I feel like we would probably see systems, and I'm not saying I support it, but I wouldn't be surprised if I see systems getting banned, like Switch 2 systems getting banned, if the first initial breadcrumbs of modding begin to happen and those systems are going online. Alternatively, for the original Switch, even though this can be put into effect because it is right here, I would be surprised if complete system bricks were being triggered unless it was something egregious. Like, let's say if someone had an original modified Switch and they were just going in and they kept getting their system banned and they kept changing out the certificate on there to unban their system. If they did that repeatedly, I could probably see that happening. Or if they were a really malicious user, or let's say if there's someone who they just had like 50 modified switches online and they were disrupting the service, then in some egregious instances like that, I could probably see that being triggered here. Again, I'm not saying that I support this practice here, I'm just more giving my own opinion on what I feel like will realistically happen or could happen here. Now we're going to have some fun with some decompilations and some ports here, and they're all going to be Nintendo related, funny enough, but the first one here is WavePhoenix, which you can see here is an open source implementation of the Nintendo WaveBird protocol using Silicon Labs wireless Gecko SoCs. Now it has a nice little animation right here, but the motivation here, they state the WaveBird controller is, in my opinion, one of the best controllers ever made. It is wireless, has an insane battery life, and is very comfortable to hold. The WaveBird set a new standard for wireless controllers. It was the first major console controller to use radio frequency technology, providing a reliable, lag-free connection that didn't require line of sight, unlike infrared controllers. Unfortunately, Nintendo stopped producing the WaveBird more than a decade ago. More than a decade? I mean, definitely, yeah, but I'm thinking like 2015. It was, I mean, this is still accurate, but it was definitely before then. Either way, they state here causing a dwindling supply of controllers and especially receivers. This was the big one here. Given the decreasing supply of receivers and the increasing resale prices, I decided to see if I could design my own from scratch. So you could see right here, this is awesome. The firmware for WavePhoenix is split into several components. You have libWaveBird, which is the implementation of the WaveBird protocol, libSI, the implementation of the SI protocol used by controllers to communicate with GameCube and Wii consoles, receiver, which reference implementation of firmware for a WaveBird receiver, and the bootloader for updating application firmware via Bluetooth. And this is one here that looks like was homebrewed, and that is quite nice here. Now for the hardware, they state that hardware for reference, a WavePhoenix receiver is available in the mini receiver directory. The receiver is designed to be as cheap as possible and easy to build. And I mean, this looks quite nice here, and it looks like here you have your PCB, you have a button on there, a LED it looks like. This looks like a connection where you could probably flash the firmware itself. There's a resistor there, it seems, and then of course you have another board component right there. So honestly, if you get this fabricated, it doesn't look hard to build at all. At least in my opinion, if you have a decent amount of soldering experience, this looks pretty simple to build. There's a lot more information on the development of this here and everything else. However, I do want to say there are some future ideas here with a USB HID dongle, a N64 WaveBird receiver, that'd be cool, and a transmitter firmware as well too. So you can build your own WaveBird controller. That'd be awesome. Now, for some special thanks, I do want to call this out. They say Sam Edwards for his incredible WaveBird reverse engineering documentation, which was essential in getting this working. Jeff Longo for his detailed GameCube controller protocol documentation. Aurelio Manara for open sourcing GC+, another great reference for the GameCube controller protocol. Yevotal Griffin for help and advice along the way and help me figure out those mysterious origin packets. Piotref1 for being the very first person to build a WavePhoenix receiver and provide feedback. A true early adopter, and everyone in the incredible BitBuilt community for their support and encouragement throughout this project. So this is really awesome here, and a big shout out to Loop J for building this out. I am curious about, if we come over here to the mini receiver directory, how this is looking, and it looks like here, yeah, it's been designed to be as cheap as possible, so about $4 in parts and easy to build. And for the parts, you can build yourself a assembled mini receiver PCB, 3D printed case, GameCube male connector, the JST SH 4-pin connector with a pre-crimped cable. There's also links for everything here. A 1.5mm PMMA fiber cable and a crimping tool. So not all too bad here. This here's awesome. I think I need to check if it works, in all honesty. I know I bought this years ago. It's somewhere in storage, but I bought years ago a WaveBird controller for quite cheap. It was like $2-3 maybe, of course, because like most WaveBird controllers out there, it's kind of a loner. You can find the controller, but not the receiver. The receivers are much harder to find. So I bought it knowing that something like this would probably happen in the future. So awesome to see those controllers get even more life to them now. On top of decompilation, we have Mario Party 4 right here, which we can see at the time of recording this is 99.88% decompiled, which is pretty much much, it's not 100%, but it's pretty much 100% decompiled. And this was a big deal because this kind of came out of nowhere for most people following this, or most people I would say who didn't follow this, such as myself, and just saw it posted like on news sites and such. But this is a big deal because this here is the first GameCube game that has been fully decompiled. We can check out the repository here. So it looks like we're on GitHub and we come over to this Mario Party 4 repository, and they state here this is a work in progress decompilation of Mario Party 4. This of course does not contain any game assets or assembly whatsoever. An existing copy of the game is required. So there's multiple supported versions, being Rev 0 and 1 from the US, Rev 0 and 2 from the PAL territory, and Rev 0 from the Japan territory, or I guess country there. But it looks like here, yeah, once you're able to do this here, you'll be able to decompile Mario Party 4. That means it will be in, I guess, less machine-readable code and more so human-readable code. And from there, of course, you can go through the process of either modifying the code itself and rebuilding your own copy of Mario Party 4, allowing for better research, documentation, even better mods for the game as well, too, being able to mod at a code level as opposed to just a file level and ripping those apart. But on top of that, this also opens up the door for ports as well too. So within the next year, if we start seeing ports of Mario Party 4 onto PC, onto, well, of course, like Windows, Linux, even if we see it on other consoles, like for example, if we see a port of Mario Party 4, like a homebrew port to the Switch, that would absolutely be something to see. So that's what kind of opens up the possibility of this here, but great job on this so far. This is really awesome that it got that far. Another one that's come up from the N64 decomp team is MK64, which I'm sure should make many people happy here, but you can see total progress 100%, and this here is a decompilation of Mario Kart 64, which pursues historical and educational elements within the game found via taking it apart and putting it back together. Inspiration to do so not only emanates from the game's hardware and technology, but also its immensely positive effects on the cultures and families of nearly every nationality. That is beautiful. I love that, actually. Of course, this does not contain any assets, and compiling requires assets extraction from a prior copy of the game. So it looks like you can use the base USA version, or you can use the 1.0 or 1.1 versions of the European copy. That's actually pretty surprising to me that that it seems, well, I guess the Japanese one's not there, but both of these versions are working just fine. That's really cool. So again, just like I said before, just talked like, a minute or two ago about Mario Party 4, this also opens up, again, not only for being able to research things further, modify the game at a code level, being able to do better mods with this, but on top of that, also being able to do native ports to other platforms. Think of, I don't know, like PSP, PS Vita, Dreamcast. We're seeing a lot of stuff on there. So Mario Kart 4 on the Dreamcast not emulated, that would be cool. And of course, if we see something like this on the Switch, that would probably be much better. Actually, not even probably. I know it would be much better than what we have on Nintendo Switch Online. So another wonderful project here. And we are not done. Even though this is the last one, we are not done here. This is from a GBA Temp article, as this is where I saw it, but another N64 game here, the unreleased Dinosaur Planet N64 game by Rare, gets an initial recompilation port using N64 Recompiled. So not necessarily a decompilation, but this is using the recompilation technologies we talked about before. They state here, this is posted by Shadow1333, but they state here, last year a brand new tool for static recompilation of N64 games called N64 Recompiled appeared, which would facilitate the conversion of N64 games to C language, as well as facilitating the creation of a native PC ports alongside, which is something that decompilation projects usually don't cover, which, yep, that's true. Since its inception, we saw the release of Majora's Mask Recompiled as the very first game tackled to showcase this recompilation tool, and slowly but surely, more and more N64 games have started to join the list of recompiled titles, with Ocarina of Time being on the pipeline, as well as a handful of other titles yet to be properly introduced with an initial recompiled release. One of these latest titles is none other than Dinosaur Planet, a title developed by rare and one that actually never made it to store shelves back in the day, and one that was originally handled as an original IP, but was eventually reworked and was attached to the Star Fox franchise, later released for the GameCube as Star Fox Adventures. Back in February of 2020, a beta build of Dinosaur Planet for the originally planned N64 console was archived and preserved, and since then, many fans took it upon themselves to start working on the beta build of the game to further improve it, bug fix it, implement not yet finished sequences and glitched portions of the game, and eventually plan on making this unreleased build of the game a fully playable and complete title. Given the huge task at hand, some of the people involved in this process started working on a decompilation project for the title, as that would greatly help the amount of work that would be done for it. Thanks to that initial decompilation project being used as a base, the N64 Recomp tool has now been implemented into Dinosaur Planet to offer an initial native PC port for the unreleased game by GitHub user Francesco121. Now, the recompilation currently includes features like modding support, work-in-progress widescreen support with HUD textures still left to be properly moved and other adjustments, and of course, high resolutions. The other things like higher frame rates are on the to-do list, but so far this is looking really promising for playing one of those obscure and unreleased games on a PC natively. And while the Dino Launcher community patches made for Dinosaur Planet, which aim to bug fix a lot of things from the initial vanilla build, are still not considered in this release of the recompilation, the developers have shown interest in trying to implement those community patches down the line to have the most updated build of the game, and work from there to further work on the unfinished build, with the possibilities of working towards a fully complete game by the community now being better than ever. So this is actually even better than I was expecting, because not only this has helped with researching, of course, like fixing up the game, which I actually didn't know there were efforts to fix up the game and I guess really complete it out and flesh it out further. So this directly helps with that, but now as opposed to emulating it, you can play this natively on PC, and since they do have better access to the source code now through recompilation and decompilation, both methods have been used, that's working even further to improve this and fix it up, not only for the N64, but now for the PC or really wherever else this is going to get ported. Of course, they also have links to the source, the N64 Recomp repository, and the Dinosaur Planet Decomp project. These are all linked down below here, but this is, again, this is cooler than I thought. This is awesome here. I love seeing this. So there we go. That is about it for this episode of ModChat. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all got to learn something, be entertained, and maybe even be impressed along the way over some of the really cool stuff that we got to cover here. Now, if you've made it to the end of this episode, first of all, thank you. Secondly, I do like to pick a keyword or a key phrase. If you haven't been here before, if you use this keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Now, typically I like to pick something off of my desk here and then show that, or not even really show it, but more just use it as the keyword. So since I have the 360 in the back idling as I usually do, I do have this controller here, which I end up customizing. It's not even anything crazy. I just changed the LEDs on it. This is back when I was in college, like 10 plus years ago, but I changed the LEDs to red. Oh, you all can see that. There we go. And then, of course, end up ordering a red shell, change out the thumbsticks and all that. It's not a bad controller, not the best one out there, but good enough that I still enjoy it. Either way, what I'm trying to say here is controller is going to be the keyword. What is your favorite controller? What is your preferred controller? Do you have any controller pet peeves? Were you the person who passed on that Mad Catz controller, or did you have to use the Mad Catz controller? I myself have a ton of affinity for the Xbox 360 controller right here. I really think this is controller perfection, but I also really like the DualSense and the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. I guess we'll see how the Pro 2 controller is as well too. But either way, if you leave your comment in the video upload with the keyword controller, I'll know that you made it to the end, and I'll get to learn some controller thoughts as well too. Either way, let's go ahead and get this wrapped up here. If you enjoyed this episode, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. And until next time.